Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this edition of Leak Project. I am your host, Rex Bear, and today's guest is Louis Dartnell. Now, Louis is an astrobiologist, and he has a ton of knowledge in biological sciences. He graduated from Oxford University and is now not only a research scientist, a presenter, also an author. Now, he completed his PhD at the University College of London back in 2007 and holds a professorship in science communication at the University of Westminster. Now, his research is in the field of astrobiology and the search for microbial life on Mars. He also has an STFC Science and Society Fellowship and is very active in delivering live events at schools, science festivals, working in the scientific community as a consultant for the media, and he's appeared in numerous TV documentaries and radio shows. He's won several awards for science writing and outreach work and regularly freelances for newspapers and magazines. He's published 3 books. His latest is called The Knowledge. Now, we get into many topics. We talk about the possibility of life on Mars, Venus, and other planets. We obviously get into microbiology. We talk about the reality TV show that's planning on sending 100 people to Mars. We talk about survival as well, the best skills to have. We get into how to rebuild the world after the apocalypse, a life support system, how to have food, clean water, clothes, toothpaste, shampoo, soap, etc. I also talked to him about the cyclical mass die-offs that are discussed in many science papers, the transhuman movement, genetically modified biology combined with electronics, and towards the end of the presentation, I asked him about Nibiru, and if he knows anybody within these circles of communities, because he has a lot of connections that have given him insider information on Planet X. So make sure to listen to what he has to say about that if you're interested. Also, I'd recommend going to leakproject.com. We've got a new storefront there. We have some t-shirts, really cool stickers, and I think that these shirts look great. They've got the logo on the front, and then on the back you'll see it'll say Leak Project, be the change you want to see, and I think that that has a pretty good impact on those that are wanting to make a change. If you're the change you want to see, if everybody is the change that they want to see, what else is there? I mean, really, if you think about it, if you're doing your part and you're following your path, is there anything that can stop you? The universe seems to have these balancers, these, I guess you could call it some type of software program that if the universe starts to get off whack or out of balance, there seems to be something that puts it back into place. This is something I've been doing some very deep thinking into for years. And the more shows we do here at the Leak Project, the more information we gather. It helps build a roadmap for all of us to get to where we need to be. Now, there's a lot going on around the world today. This morning, I got an email from Gerald Clark. We're going to do a show later this afternoon. I don't know if you guys have heard about what happened in China with an airplane that had a genetically modified swine flu in it that they were going to spray on the masses out there, and it got shut down. There's some news reports about this, new news reports about this, and we're going to discuss this tonight. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Be the change you want to see. This is Rex Bear. Talk to you soon. All right. Well, Louis, it's great to have you on the show here with us at the Leak Project. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. How the heck are you? Yeah, it's great to have you. Now, we've had the opportunity to talk a little bit before the show, and I'm just really excited to hear what you have to say about astrobiology. I've been doing research on Mars and Venus and the moon and different planets in our solar system for years, and I've seen some pretty crazy pictures that I can't explain from like JPL satellites of what almost looks like trees on Mars. Now, whether they are or not, I don't know, but it's pretty compelling. Have you seen some of that stuff before?
I mean, I've obviously seen lots and lots of photographs of Mars. I haven't seen any myself that look like trees.
Okay.
I'd be very surprised if there were any trees growing on Mars. And it has a very thin atmosphere, very high levels of radiation, no liquid water on the surface across large areas of Mars. So I think, because a lot of people say they've seen like Yogi Bear on Mars, or they've seen what looks like a spanner on the surface. And I think this is just a really good example of the human brain being exceedingly good at pattern recognition, at thinking it sees things in kind of patterns of light and shade in photos, which is the same thing as lying on your back on a lovely summer's afternoon having a picnic in the park and looking at the clouds floating by and seeing Mickey Mouse in one of the clouds. It's pretty much the same effect, I think.
I would definitely say I agree for the most part. There have been a few images that I've seen that I wouldn't explain as that type of anomaly where I'd say, wow, I can see the symmetrical design on the left and the right and such, but it could be just that pattern recognition because I'm not there. I mean, I recently saw an article that somebody posted a picture of the Mars rover, a picture that it took, and then there was a picture of Egypt, and they were exactly the same. I was like, wait a second here. Could the Mars rover actually be in Egypt? I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's so much on the internet. It's like a bathroom wall. You can write anything about anybody or whatever.
Lots of conspiracy theories on the internet.
There really is. It reminds me of that commercial where that gal's waiting to meet somebody on a blind date that she talked to on the internet, and he said he was a French model. And she's talking to her friend, and she's like, yeah, I met a French model on the internet, and you can't lie on the internet. Everything on the internet's true. And he shows up, and he just looks like a total goofball, and he goes, bonjour. So it just kind of puts that into perspective. So let's get into the meat and potatoes. I mean, the knowledge that you have. You've gone to school for a lot of years. You've got degrees and research and seen papers that most of us haven't had access to. So let's talk a little bit about your background, and then we'll start getting into astrobiology and what you've seen that's out there. And then I definitely want to touch on your book, The Knowledge, How to Rebuild Our World from Scratch. I think that's a vital thing we need to be thinking about right now with the way the world is.
Yeah, so my research field is in astrobiology, as we kind of mentioned right at the beginning, which is, I guess, a relatively new area of science. It's very interdisciplinary. It involves lots of different areas of science and how they overlap. So I came from a biology background, but I have lots of friends in astrobiology who've come from geology or chemistry or physics and astronomy or kind of planetary science and earth sciences. And astrobiology kind of sits at the middle, the intersection of all these different kinds of science. And it's all about looking into the possibility of there being life beyond the Earth. So it's taking as much of this knowledge and understanding as we've been able to accumulate over the years of life on our own planet and how we think life first got started here, and the incredible ranges of conditions that we now realize terrestrial life can survive under. So these so-called extremophile life forms living in very hostile and nasty environments. And then it's extending that knowledge to places beyond the Earth. So Mars, we've already mentioned, which is essentially a desert world today. And one of the other places in the solar system that we think might have a good chance of life, not on its surface, but under the surface, is Europa, which is one of the moons orbiting Jupiter, one of the icy satellites. And we know that beneath the surface of Europa, there's a dark, deep, alien ocean, an ocean with more liquid water in it than all of the seas and lakes and rivers and oceans of the whole of the Earth put together. And so Europa...
That's incredible.
I mean, it is absolutely phenomenal. The fact is that Europa, this tiny icy moon orbiting Jupiter, is the water world of our solar system and not the Earth. And so we think that there's possibly also a habitable zone. There's a region where life could survive under this icy shell on Europa and this global ocean of liquid water.
I mean, you could definitely speculate about that, and I would think that if there's that much water and with sunlight, if it's able to reach the planet, or, I'm not an expert, but I would certainly think there could be some pretty complex life forms in there. Who knows what's growing underwater there?
Well, the interesting thing about Europa is that the life in that ocean couldn't be photosynthetic. It wouldn't have algae or plankton like we have in Earth's oceans, because the ocean in Europa is completely sealed over by a very thick shell of ice. And so sunlight can't penetrate through. So rather than using sunshine as an energy source, like most life on the surface of Earth does, any life in Europa and any native Europans would have to use different energy sources to survive. So rather than being photosynthetic, they'd be chemosynthetic. They derive their energy from chemistry, from things like iron and sulfur that might be pouring out of hydrothermal vents on the sea floor in Europa, as we find in the sea floor of the Earth as well, with black smokers and hydrothermal vents, that life on Europa would have to live that way rather than by essentially being sunbathers like life on the surface of the Earth is.
So it's just a completely different makeup, essentially. The DNA, the building blocks, feed off of different energy sources. And, let me ask you, what's a typical day like for you as far as the research that you do? Do you go into your office and somebody secretary or somebody that you work with brings you up, here's this little slide that I want you to take a look at. We picked this up from Mars. You need to put this under the electron microscope, and then that way you can see the building blocks of biology. I mean, what's it like, man?
Yeah, so a lot of my work is lab-based, and it's working with these hardy life forms, these extremophiles from different places on Earth, and understanding how they survive. So a lot of my work is done with very radiation-resistant bacteria and life forms, because, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of radiation on the surface of Mars because it doesn't get protection from cosmic rays.
Can I jump in real quick, Lewis? Just about I wanted to just jump in real quick about the radiation, because I keep track of the radiation levels out here. I'm actually looking at my MTM Rad watch, which has a Geiger counter built into it. And I picked this up back in 2013 after I read so much on the internet about how Fukushima was going to kill everybody. And so I just wanted to be, okay, well, there's all these websites out there that are saying the radiation levels are through the roof. I want to know for myself. So I dropped the money down on one of these watches, and I've taken this thing pretty much everywhere with me. And this thing is accurate like you wouldn't believe. I took it when I flew to Alaska a few years ago. The radiation levels spiked all the way up to 4.2 microsieverts per hour, which was
on the flight.
Yes, on the flight.
When you're flying an airplane, you're much higher up in the atmosphere. So
you're
not getting shielding from cosmic rays.
I can just imagine what that would do to the over a long period of time for pilots and for the stewardesses, the flight attendants that are up there. But, the levels have been the reason I just wanted to bring this up real quick is the levels have increased, I've noticed, about 30 to 40% over the past few years on a collective basis, at least out here in San Antonio. And they're hovering around 0.11 microsieverts right now. But what would the radiation levels be like on Mars?
So I'm not trying to convert the units in my head, but the modeling work, computer simulations that I've done on the radiation from cosmic rays on Mars, and that other people have done as well, comes out as about 0.02 gray a year. So if you're an astronaut walking around on the surface of Mars, you're mostly okay, you're mostly safe, as long as you can try and dodge or protect yourself better against big solar flares or great big pulses of solar energetic particles. And so the kind of things that NASA and other space organizations are thinking of for colonies and habitats on Mars and our first Mars missions are to essentially build a kind of a storm shelter. So you can't protect the whole of your spaceship or the whole of your Mars habitat with enough shielding like you get on Earth with a thick atmosphere and a big magnetic field. But you can protect small areas very well by surrounding it with your water supply, your water tanks, or even partially burying it with the soil that you can dig up on Mars. So the idea is you protect a small area, and if you get a kind of space weather report that a massive solar flare is heading you away on Mars, then you kind of get yourself into the storm shelter and wait it out for a couple of hours or maybe a day to protect yourself from the worst of that radiation. But if you're of Martian bacteria in the top meter or two of the surface of Mars, then you don't get much protection, and particularly over long periods of time, that kind of radiation damage would build up and potentially kill Martian bacteria that might have been there waiting for us to find, and it would be basically dead by the time we get to it.
Or I wonder if it could actually, have you ever looked into the mutational possibilities? It's like super bacteria.
So in order to evolve and change your genome with mutations, you have to be alive and active and reproducing. And the problem with the surface of Mars is it's so cold and dry that any life there is likely to be dormant for very long periods of time. So it kind of accumulates the damage until the point where it's being completely killed, rather than active life on Earth, which picks up mutations and that drives natural selection and an evolution. So obviously life on Mars would have evolved, but right now on the surface, where it's very cold and dry because Mars has lost its atmosphere and lost its seas and rivers, that life is probably pretty much just clinging on by its fingertips, if it's not already been driven to extinction already.
Now, did you see a cover of Time magazine, the 1995 cover that shows Mars with a blue atmosphere and clearly two poles? It looks completely different than the images we see now.
Yeah, so that's the idea. That's the visualization of what Mars might have looked like 3.5–4 billion years ago, when Mars was itself a much more Earth-like place with seas and rivers and a thicker atmosphere and a kind of warmer surface. But also, it's excitingly, that's what we hope we might be able to return Mars to at some point in the future. And this is the idea of terraforming, that perhaps rather than just landing astronauts who would have to walk around on Mars with spacesuits on or living inside pressurized habitats, that at some point in centuries in the future, we'd be able to terraform Mars, to make Mars more Earth-like once again by restoring its atmosphere, by allowing water to flow on its surface once again. And that's the kind of the images that you can see in some of these artists and kind of graphic reproductions of what Mars looked like in its very primordial state, and what we might try to return it to at some point in the future so that people could live on Mars and farm there and, make their living and kind of survive out in the open.
Sure. Now, the image that I'm actually referring to was a satellite image, or at least that's what Time magazine claimed it to be. It wasn't a drawing, and it just looks a lot different than the images do now. The planet is much more red. Maybe in a little bit here I can just do a quick comparison, pull it up on the screen and show you real quick. Now, the film The Martian that came out just a couple of years ago with Matt Damon, great movie, really enjoyed it. And I'm sure, just like most Hollywood films, they'll throw in some bits and pieces of truth, and what they want to do with the future is kind of where the overall archetype is being pushed in many technologies and such. Did you see the film? And if you did, what do you think about that? Is that where we're going, essentially?
I did. I very much enjoyed the film, and I read the book a year or two before that as well. In fact, I had emails back and forth with Andy Weir, who's the author for The Martian, because I was in his neck of the woods this time last year when I was doing talks at Google, Wikipedia, and the Long Now Foundation in San Francisco. And Andy Weir lives in Mountain View, just outside San Francisco. So I was trying to see if we could meet up and chat through those ideas. Because clearly The Martian is very, very similar to my science of astrobiology and how bacteria could survive on Mars, or what technology you'd need to keep humans alive on Mars. And The Martian, the book and the film, is pretty much the perfect overlap between my research in astrobiology and my latest book, The Knowledge, which is all about how you could restart civilization from scratch if you ever had to, or how you go right back to basics to provide the fundamentals for you that you need to get by. So I'm still kicking myself to this day that Andy wrote the Martian rather than it occurring to me to research and write that book. But I did really enjoy the film. And as you say, clearly it makes, it takes some liberties with true factual accuracy for one or two things. But on the whole, it's a really good portrayal. It's a really faithful portrayal of what life on Mars would be like for the first missions, and what kind of technology and kit they'd have to take with them to land on Mars and to survive when they're there.
Oh, that's great that you had a chance to be a part of that. Also, Mars One, the mission to Mars for human settlement, where they had 100 people they picked out of who knows how many. What's your thought on that? Is that a PR campaign more so, or do you feel that this will actually end up turning into reality?
Well, I think that the Mars One project is a very genuine attempt. I think they're being honest about it, and they are trying to get together the technology and the funding to launch a manned mission to Mars. But my personal opinion, my hunch, is that I don't think it will. I don't think Mars One will launch and won't send enough humans to get a self-sustaining colony on the surface of Mars. And I think that there's several problems with generating and raising enough finance in the first place, as well as having all the technology available in the kind of timescale they're talking about of the next 10 years or so to safely and reliably send people to Mars. But when people like Elon Musk are saying that they fully intend to retire on Mars, i.e. in 40 years' time, that we'll have the technology and the capability that is safe and reliable in that time frame, then I think there's a lot to be said for that. I think if there's one person in the world, when he says, I'm going to retire on Mars, that you probably think he might be able to pull it off, it's someone like Elon Musk. And he's been making enormous advances in just the last couple of years with his own private company with SpaceX, and building their own rocket and testing them. And they've had successful dockings of their spacecraft to the International Space Station. So imagine what we'll be able to achieve if we continue at this rate, with private spaceflight, with corporations leading the charge, rather than just government institutions like NASA or ESA or JAXA or Roscosmos, which are the Japanese and Russian space agencies. So genuinely now is a very, very exciting time in spaceflight and space exploration, because it's kind of being driven from a different angle now. It's a corporate enterprise, it's a private enterprise, rather than just public ventures like NASA.
Oh, yeah, I certainly appreciate what Mr. Musk is doing. And you look at the space travel, the privatized space flights and the rockets, and then also his technology with vehicles. I think they had those cars with 200-mile spans on just electric when, the big companies were coming out with 30, 40 miles. and the cars look like shoes versus a nice looking sports car. So, which that just makes logical sense. If you've got the money, why not put together a vehicle that's beautiful and efficient? And the technology, he's throwing it all out there. He's saying, I don't care about these big companies, the big oil companies. I'm just going to come up with something. And I appreciate that, because that's what it's going to take to get to the next level, I feel, is privatization and business and benefits, not just government usurping up all the stuff so for themselves. That's really cool. Now, let me ask you this. I mean, you've just definitely got an amazing position. What you do for a career is absolutely incredible. The people you talk to, the research that you've done. Have you seen samples of biology from other planets and comets and meteors and stuff like that too?
Well, no, that's what we are trying to find. So in some sense, astrobiology is a science that hasn't yet found its own subject matter. We are trying to work out where are the most likely places in the solar system that could harbour life beyond the Earth, and what are the best ways, the best experiments, and the best instruments that we could send on our robotic probes or take with humans in the not too distant future to places like Mars to try to find that life. But we don't have any examples of life on Mars or anywhere else just yet. We're still trying to make that first discovery or make that first detection. But we do have samples of Mars on Earth. We haven't ever launched a probe to Mars and brought samples back ourselves. But we do have lumps of Martian meteorites. So rocks from the surface of Mars that blasted off by a big asteroid impact that then flew through space and happened to stumble across the Earth again in its orbit and fell as a shooting star, fell as a meteorite. And we've picked up a number of examples of Mars rocks that have fallen to the Earth now. And I've worked with some of these. I've held a piece of Mars in the palm of my hand, a piece of another world in the palm of your hand. And even just thinking about that is a spine-tingling, incredible thought. And people I know, so other astrobiologists, are spending a lot of time and effort analysing and scrutinising these pieces of Mars rock to try to learn as much as they can about the environment on Mars and the history of the red planet, to work out how habitable, how appropriate for life ever was, and possibly looking to see whether there might be signs of life themselves inside these Martian rocks. So what kind of complexity of organic chemistry, of organic molecules do we find in these rocks? And do we find signs that life has been an active process in there? Because these are the same kind of things we're going to try to do with each new generation of Mars rover that we land on Mars, and try to do the experiments there and look for signs of life in situ on the surface of Mars.
And it'd be great to hear about some of the stuff you've done research on here at home with these extreme life forms. Now, as far as the temperatures go, where some of this biology can exist, talk to us about that. Let's get into the extremes. Yeah,
so the kind of extremophiles that I focus on primarily in my own work, as I mentioned earlier, are radiation-resistant extremophiles. And one organism in particular is called Deinococcus radiodurans, which means in classical Roman and in Latin and Greek, it translates to radiation-resistant fearsome balls, which when you translate it in English is a ridiculous name. But these cells, these Deinococcus radiodurans, were originally isolated pretty prosaically from cans of kind of dog food, cans of food. And it was a bit of a mystery back in the 50s when we first discovered this bacterium, because they were isolated from cans of food that had been irradiated with gamma rays, so with ionizing radiation, to very high levels that should have sterilized the can, should have killed any known life form inside those cans, so that the cans didn't spoil and the food remained good. But really bizarrely, these cans of food just kept on going off, they kept on spoiling. So they isolated the bacterium inside that food that had been causing it to go off, that survived such an incredibly high dose of radiation. And that's when we discovered Deinococcus radiodurans. And it now turns up in really extreme places like the cooling waters of nuclear power stations, where we're places where there's a high level of radiation. But the really confusing thing, the really curious thing about this organism is that it can survive doses of radiation far, far higher than it would have ever encountered in the natural environment. So the question was, why has this bacterium evolved such a high radiation resistance when it would have never needed it in the natural world? And it turns out that Deinococcus and other radiation-resistant organisms aren't really radiation-resistant, they are desiccation-resistant. They're very good at surviving being dried out. And their natural environment is deserts, places like the Atacama Desert in Chile, or the Antarctic dry valleys near the South Pole, which are very Mars-like environments in their own respects, because they're either very cold or very, very dry. And organisms like Deinococcus have evolved to survive being dried out and desiccated. which gives them the right kind of survival skills they also need to survive high radiation levels. So it's almost as the kind of radiation resistance is like a spin-off technology from them having evolved to survive the desert-like environment. So these are very exciting organisms. They're incredibly hardy. They're very hard to kill. And they survive in environments on Earth, which in many ways are Mars-like. So there might be model organisms for the kind of things that we could find on Mars. They might be similar to Martians in those ways.
Now, aren't there those creatures that look like little mini polar bears almost with no eyeballs? What are those called?
Tardigrades, they're called, yeah. So tardigrades are also very interesting. They're multicellular life. They're relatively complex life forms. And even these things can survive being completely dried out and frozen to very low temperatures or exposed to very high doses of radiation. So again, these are great examples of extremophiles, of hardy life on Earth. But we probably wouldn't expect to find something like a tardigrade on Mars, because you still would have needed 3 billion years of evolution to get from hardy bacteria up to eukaryotic cells, which are the kind of advanced cell that humans and plants and mushrooms and tardigrades are made out of, and multicellular life. So although tardigrades are very hardy, we don't think they could have evolved on Mars, because Mars didn't have an environment suitable on its surface for long enough periods of time.
Okay. And do you work with the UK Space Agency?
I do. They fund me for my research. Until very recently, I was a UK Space Agency research fellow, so they funded me for my work.
What's that like?
I mean, it's good. So UK Space Agency is based in Swindon, which if you've ever visited the UK is not perhaps the most picturesque or inspiring of places, but that's where they have their head offices. And they're they're a funding agency. They fund a great deal of research in space exploration, and a lot of that overlaps with astrobiology. So I've had funding from UK Space Agency. A lot of other people I know in the community that do astrobiology research or Mars exploration or space probes have been funded by UK Space Agency as well. So they're a great organisation for supporting and funding a lot of very exciting and interesting work.
Okay. And what is your take on extraterrestrials and UFOs?
Well, clearly I believe in extraterrestrials in the broader sense of the word, because astrobiology is all about trying to find life beyond Earth, trying to find extraterrestrial life. But I think when most people hear the word aliens or extraterrestrials, you immediately have this visualization in your mind. You have this imagination of the kind of things you've seen in sci-fi books or Hollywood films or comic books, which are green bug-eyed aliens or green bug-eyed monsters, which is not what we spend most of our time looking for in astrobiology. And the reason we spend most of our time thinking about microscopic life of things like bacteria is because we think that kind of life is more common in the galaxy and in the solar system, because single-celled life is the first kind of life to appear on a planet, and it certainly predates human life by 3.5 billion years on Earth. So for the vast majority of a planet's history, it's populated by pond scum, by simple, primitive life forms. And we think that only very special planets, perhaps very Earth-like planets, have got the right kind of environment for long enough for life to have had the opportunity to evolve beyond simple bacterial life to multicellular life, to complex life, to intelligent life, to life that can build technology and spaceships like humans have now worked out to do. So although we think that life is common in the galaxy, we suspect that intelligent life or complex life is probably rare, if not so rare that maybe we are the sole and only example of intelligent life in the galaxy. So that there's a kind of a subset of astrobiology which is looking for life in general, and that subset is called SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and that's much more interested with looking for, like I say, civilizations out there in the galaxy or intelligent life, which so far we haven't really seen any convincing evidence for. The galaxy seems to be a very quiet place. We don't seem to receive any messages that being beamed to us by intelligent aliens. We don't see any signs of obvious industry or artificial things out there in the galaxy. So although I'd love to be proved wrong tomorrow, I'd love for us to receive some kind of extraterrestrial tweet or text message, some kind of radio signal beamed to the Earth. In 50 years of listening, we haven't received anything yet. So I think the conservative assumption is that maybe that life isn't out there. And in that sense, the humans are special in our galaxy for being an intelligent life.
And I'm looking at an article right now from NASA.gov, actually, and it says NASA's Kepler mission has now confirmed the first near-Earth-sized planet in the habitable zone around a sun very similar to our star. Now, there's also been, since this article, because this is from 2015, I've seen other ones that have came out saying they found new planets that could be habitable, etc. Yet to say there's life on there, that's speculation, which doesn't have valid scientific data to back it up completely. So I appreciate your stance on that. When I look at things on a global scale and see what's able to live here on Earth, in the volcano zones, radioactive zones, etc. And then you see these other planets and hear about all these new discoveries where maybe these planets are even older than ours and habitable zones. It might make you think, yeah, there could be life out there even more advanced than we are technologically, maybe spiritually, because they've evolved longer. But one question that I think is important to know about, especially from you, is because you do the research. When you're watching this microbiology under a telescope, do you see these things move around almost like a consciousness, like ants or people in a way on a grand scale? Does that make sense?
Well, if you're looking down a microscope at bacteria or more complex single-celled life like amoeba or something like that, then yeah, they can display relatively complex behaviors. They can swarm, they can move to particular things. Organisms like slime mold, a single-celled life, but every now and then they kind of pull together and build on their scale, great big structures in order to start spraying their spores again. So even primitive single-celled life can be relatively complex in its behavior and how it responds to the environment. But I don't think you could ever go as far to say that bacteria are intelligent or conscious, because those are particular emergent properties of large brains. So you might be able to argue that other animal species beyond the Earth are intelligent or are self-aware to a certain extent or have a degree of consciousness. But I don't think you'd ever claim that single-celled life or bacteria or plants are conscious.
Okay. And you know how there's also in certain Amazon jungles, different locations here, they've got this bacteria, parasitic bacteria essentially, that will get embedded into like grasshoppers or snakes, and then it'll take over the brain literally, and then this snake or this insect will go to a certain location that is prime for this parasite to grow and flourish and then give birth and just keep doing it. And I wonder if that's a concern to people that deal with astrobiology, such as yourself, wondering about something, maybe a meteorite or a comet hitting Earth, or if we go out to Mars and explore, if we bring something back, if it could be the same type of thing taking over humans' brains, they don't even realize it. You know what I mean?
That does make a great sci-fi film storyline, doesn't it? It's
they're here. They're here.
Invasion of the Body Snatchers, isn't it? Or an Andromeda strain or something.
Sure.
And you can't discount the possibility that if we find bacteria on Mars and bring them back to the Earth, that they could contaminate into our ecosystem. But I think it would be quite a stretch of belief that that bacteria would be a disease or a pathogen for humans, because there's an incredibly close association between any disease, any pathogen, and its host. And even a lot of diseases that are very similar life forms to humans, so other mammals, we don't share diseases with other mammals very easily. It takes a lot for a disease to jump from one even closely related species into another. And although we got things like HIV and AIDS, we think, from monkeys, that in itself was a very difficult step for the virus to adopt a new host. So to try to imagine that something on Mars, which has been isolated from all life on Earth for 3.5 billion years, to somehow by chance have the right proteins expressed on its cell membrane and all this kind of epidemiology and cell biology to be able to infect into humans, the chances are so vanishingly small that you might as well get worried about other things. It's more likely that human life will be affected by an asteroid striking the Earth rather than a plague of Martian viruses. So that's why astrobiologists aren't concerned or unduly concerned about plagues and viruses from Mars.
We come in peace. We come. You remember that movie? What was it called? Attack from Mars or something? Had Jack Nicholson in it. pretty good film.
So there was Mars Attacks, wasn't there?
Yeah, Mars Attacks.
Here's Brosnan as well as the scientist who got zapped by the death rays.
Oh yeah, that was a classic. And then they started playing the music, and then all their brains started blowing up at the end there.
Popping inside their space helmets. Yeah.
That's how you do it, guys. If we ever get attacked by Martians, just play some Led Zeppelin. We'll be okay. Now, you also write some incredible stuff about just the possibilities of rebuilding after an apocalypse or cataclysms. If you go to the/knowledge.org, you can actually look at the book that you put together, The Knowledge, How to Rebuild Our World from Scratch. Let's talk about this.
Yeah, so alongside doing all my research and kind of lab-based science, I get a lot of enjoyment, a lot of satisfaction about science communication and public outreach as well. So I do loads of talks at schools or science festivals. I was at a music festival last weekend talking about science in one of the tents in between music gigs and kind of poetry and kind of stand-up comedians. So it's really nice to kind of get out there and tell people about things I find exciting and interesting. And alongside all that, I do a lot of writing as well. And my first book was all about exactly what we've been talking about astrobiology and this science involved in the search for life beyond Earth. And that book is called Life and Universe: A Beginner's Guide. And my most recent book, The Knowledge, How to Rebuild Our World from Scratch, or How to Rebuild Civilization After Apocalypse, it's got slightly different subtitles in the US and UK editions, is much more of a thought experiment. And I don't really think the world is about to end, of course. But what I wanted to be able to do and explore as a scientist and as a science writer was try to kind of look behind the scenes, look under the bonnet, look under the hood of the engine that is our civilization, and try to understand how it works. What are the real behind the scenes fundamentals of our everyday lives and all the things that we just take for granted without really thinking about a second time, and the stuff that our grandparents knew how to do themselves, knew how to fix things and make things and repair things in a way that we don't really, to any extent anymore in this modern world that we live in. And so I thought a good way of exploring all that stuff, all that wonderful behind the scenes stuff of civilization, was to imagine that it disappeared tomorrow. It was to imagine there was some kind of apocalypse and civilization collapses and the vast majority of humanity dies, but you have this community of post-apocalyptic survivors kind of scratching their heads and trying to work out how to make and do things for themselves from scratch, because now they have to, because no one else is going to do it for them. So this was a lot of fun. Researching, writing for the Knowledge was like a 3-year project from beginning to end. And as well as clearly doing a lot of reading and looking up facts and details on Wikipedia, as well as doing lots of library work and reading lots of other books. It was a great opportunity to get my hands dirty and do a lot of stuff in terms of hands-on research for real for this book. So I did a lot of projects like making a steel tool myself from scratch to see how that was done. And I made glass from scratch using only the raw ingredients that you can gather from the same beach. And the idea being that once you've made glass, you can then fashion it into test tubes or petri dishes to use as tools for science to explore the natural world around you and understand how it works. And you can even use glass to manipulate light itself, to make a lens for a microscope or a telescope, so you can explore things which are too small to see or too far away to see with your own unaided eye. So a lot of this was a lot of great fun, not just like saying kind of reading and library-based research and interviewing a whole range of different experts in different areas, but actually doing things myself to write this book, to write the Knowledge.
Now, when you put this together and started doing this stuff, the 3 years essentially you put into it, talk to us about how difficult it was just to do your everyday stuff. I mean, I think about going back even just 100 years, and I would say one of the reasons we've become so much more technologically advanced is because we're not spending so much time looking for food and being hunters and gatherers. We can just go to the grocery store and buy stuff now. We don't have to go search for it ourselves typically.
No, you're absolutely right. And over time, the pattern of human progress, if you want to call it that, and advancement has been increasing efficiency and effectiveness at growing food. So you don't have your entire community out hunting and gathering or foraging. But you have maybe just 1 in 5 people, or 1 in 10 people, or 1 in 20 people, as we're now approaching in modern industrialized agriculture, that one person can feed 10 others. And then those 10 other people can do other things. They can specialize in other particular niches or roles within society. They can become medics and doctors, or engineers and architects, or chemists, or research scientists, or all these other different roles that each of us now take in our society. And by doing that, by having your society based out of individuals who are very specialized and therefore very good at what they do, the entire community, the entire civilization becomes much more effective and efficient, and progresses faster and faster and faster. So that there's been kind of key transitions, key stepping stones in our own history as to how we learn how to do new things and be more capable in terms of science and knowledge and technology and inventions. And I look at each of those stepping stones, each of those key areas in the different chapters of the Knowledge, and explain why they're important and how it enables you to do stuff that you couldn't do before, and how you could go about relearning that for yourself if you ever had to.
What do you think would happen if, let's say, there was an EMP and all electronics essentially, or the majority of them, got wiped out? What's the next step?
Yeah, so as I said, the knowledge, the book, isn't really about the end of the world. I just use that as the premise for the thought experiment. But there are different genuine threats or hazards to our current way of life, to our current civilization. And bearing in mind our current civilization, by that I mean Western Europe, European civilization of the medieval times that then colonized and spread around the rest of the world. And so that current civilization we live in is something of a freak, of an anomaly, that it has survived for so long and that it has progressed and advanced and not kind of stagnated or even collapsed as the vast majority of other civilizations throughout history have. So I think even though, as I say, that there's no particular thing to be worried about or losing sleep over, it is true that most civilizations through history have collapsed or have stagnated. So it's certainly possible for our current civilization to do the same, that we could have this great big fall of civilization. And the sort of events that might trigger that could be something like another pandemic plague, something like the Black Death of the 1340s in our own history, or an asteroid strike that we've already alluded to, or a global nuclear war. And one of the particular effects of detonating nuclear weapons is you get this EMP, you get this electromagnetic pulse that you mentioned, which isn't directly damaging to life, but it's directly damaging to our technology, and particularly electronics and circuits, and things like the transformers that enable us to build these, nation or continent-spanning power distribution grids that. It's electricity that's one of the linchpins of how we do absolutely everything in our society today. So if we had something like a coronal mass ejection from the sun that hit the Earth, like it did in the year 1859, when we were essentially in a pre-electrical industrial civilization, or someone deliberately triggered that with something like an EMP pulse, then you'd essentially be hitting the reset button. You'd be hitting the off button on our electrified lifestyle. And the problem with that is the very thing you need in order to repair the damage that's been done and to manufacture new transformers or new circuits and new electronics in your factories, the very thing you need to recover electricity is electricity in the factories. So you start facing this kind of fundamental chicken and the egg problem. That how do you start rebuilding our electrical distribution grids and that kind of infrastructure if the very infrastructure you need to repair that is what's been knocked down? So there's very genuine concern over the damaging effects of something like a Carrington-style event or a coronal mass ejection or something like an EMP. And in terms of rebuilding afterwards, what I talk about in the book and the knowledge is you essentially got a whole spectrum of different possibilities. And something like a pandemic plague, something that kills a large percentage of human population very quickly, so maybe something like bubonic plague or something like some hypervirulent virus, that's basically on the opposite end from something like an EMP, from electromagnetic pulse, because in the plague sense, you wipe out a lot of people very quickly, but leave behind the technology. And in the EMP or coronal mass ejection scenario, you wipe out the technology, but all the people survive. So these are basically opposites of each other. These are kind of yin and yangs of disasters. And they would both have their own problems in their own right as to how you could go about recovering from that event and then trying to rebuild from scratch and try to reboot a civilization from the ground up, which is that kind of thought experiment I talk about in the knowledge.
Okay. And, also with the research that you've done, have you found anything with cyclical evidence of mass die-offs?
Well, like I say, there have been examples in history of shocks to the order, to the way of things, or to civilization by diseases. As I mentioned, there's been the bubonic plague, which is infamous in the kind of 1340s, but that was by no means the only occasion or only outbreak of bubonic plague or Black Death. There were kind of reverberations of pretty much the same disease over centuries after that. And there's been other mysterious plagues even earlier in history, like the plague of, I can't remember. In the ancient classical world, that there was another very mysterious plague that wiped out a lot of people in the cities, and we haven't been able to reconstruct what that disease might have been. So yeah, by all means, there's been recurrent events of pathogens and disease outbreaks throughout the world.
Okay. And also, one thing that's really on the forefront today is the transhuman movement. There's obviously a lot of benefits with electronics and technology, and there can also be a lot of disadvantages to electronics and technology, depending on if you let it work for you or if you work for it. And,
Yeah.
Ray Kurzweil, the singularity that he talks about by 2045, where we'll basically be so obsolete that this one super intelligence will be able to far surpass all of us combined. Even if we took all of our brain power at the same time and used it, it wouldn't be up to par with this super intelligence that Mr. Kurzweil talks about, essentially. Astrobiology, as well as, let's get into microbiology. Have you ever looked at or talked to people that work on genetically modifying us at the building block level, or biology at the building block level, to create like a super intelligence almost, or something different?
Well, the short answer is no. That's not really my field of research. But clearly, I spend a lot of time talking to other scientists, and I'm very interested in other fields and trying to kind of keep up to date. So I know of these predictions of the singularity and the emergence of some kind of hyper capable or hyper intelligent artificial intelligence or mind, which is certainly a concern. But obviously, this isn't the first time in history when people have had concerns or worries very legitimately so about new technologies. And, this goes right back to the Industrial Revolution, and then the Luddites being concerned with the introduction of automated sewing machines and looms of creating clothes. And then there's been, example after example after example through the decades and centuries of history of new technologies causing concern because it might be dangerous, it might pose a hazard or risk to us. But as you say, no technology and no knowledge is inherently good or inherently evil. It just depends on what you apply it to. So I see great benefits of having artificial intelligences or computer minds which are more capable than humans. You might argue that something which is more intelligent than us would be more empathetic. It would kind of not necessarily look upon humanity as something that should be wiped out. It might try to help humans and help our society. And at the end of the day, we might enter some kind of symbiotic relationship that a hyper-intelligent computer would still need something that humanity could survive. We might need to power it by generating electricity to support that AI. And it could help us by coming up with solutions to scientific problems or environmental problems that we're facing. And the two could work well together. I mean, I don't know, I'm kind of speculating about what the future in 50 years might hold. But I'm certainly not unduly concerned about some of these possibilities.
We certainly live in amazing times, and you just look at 20 years ago, a computer in your house was maybe 486 megahertz or something like that, just as what a calculator would be now. If we look at our smartphones now, it would blow away a home computer even 15 years ago. And then you look at the supercomputers that are out there. IBM had one in 2008 that was running 1 quadrillion floating points per second. It was the Roadrunner, cutting edge. And now China's got a supercomputer that's running 93 quadrillion floating points per second.
Yeah.
And that's, so you look at the exponential growth there, and it's fascinating. But certainly what you bring to the table, what you just brought up about the clothes, that makes a lot of sense. Oh, hey, fire, that may cause damage, So I can certainly...
I mean, that's it, exactly. You can use anything for good, you can use anything for evil. It's humans that are moral agents, not the technologies that we invent.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I would definitely recommend our audience go to lewisdartnell.com. And if you want to pick up some of these books that you've written 3 books, correct? And will you give our audience the names of those real quick?
So my first book, so these are all popular science books. These aren't academic textbooks. This is something you can pick off, the bookshelves at Borders or get from Amazon or whatever. And the first book is a kind of introduction to astrobiology and our search, the science for the search for life beyond the Earth. And that is called Life in the Universe, A Beginner's Guide. My second book is an illustrated children's book with Dorling Kinsley, and it's called My Tourist Guide to the Solar System. And it's really kind of graphic and imaginative and bright and colourful. And it's all about where you could go on holiday in outer space and what unique things you could do on Mars that you can't do anywhere else in the solar system, or what you would want to remember to pack in your suitcase if you went for holiday on Europa or Titan, and what kind of adventure activities. Swimsuit for Europa, or take your scuba gear to Europa. You can swim in that ocean. If you go to Titan, because it's got very low gravity but a very thick atmosphere, you could actually fly like a bird by flapping your own arms with wings attached. You could take off. So that'd be an incredible thing to try for yourself if you went on holiday to Titan. And my third and most recent book, as we've just been talking about, is called The Knowledge: How to Rebuild Our World from Scratch. And it's a thought experiment about how you could reboot civilization from scratch after some kind of apocalypse. and what's the most crucial science and technology that you would want to preserve if all other knowledge was about to be lost to history. What's the most important essence of the sum total of human understanding you want to try to preserve to help you recover as quickly as possible?
And maybe just one more question before we close out tonight. And I certainly know that this isn't your expertise, but we talked a little bit about this before the show. And recently we did a podcast with Mr. Jeffries where he presented some data from Professor Brown at Caltech University. And I think that it was titled, essentially, there's a 99.993% chance of a large body in the solar system. And a lot of people speculate that's Planet X or Nibiru or Wormwood. Yet if you look at the telescopes and technology now, there's articles coming out every day saying they found a whole bunch of new planets outside of the asteroid belt, or the Kuiper belt, I think essentially is what it's named. So what is that to you, and what are the inner circles in your community and people that you know about that have access to world-class technologies and telescopes? What are they talking about with this stuff?
Yeah, so in recent years, we've now discovered around 4,000 planets orbiting other suns in our galaxy, or orbiting other stars in the night sky. And these are called the extrasolar planets, or exoplanets. And there's also been a recent study, as you mentioned, looking at evidence for another planet in our own solar system. And we haven't been able to directly see this with our telescopes. If I'm remembering the same study as what you're talking about, this is statistical evidence based on the orbits of lots of icy bodies in the outer solar system. And these scientists, these astronomers, have claimed that there's evidence in those statistics that there must be something with gravity that's disturbing the orbits of these other icy bodies. So we haven't directly seen something, but we've inferred that there might be something out there. But I don't think this would be the same body that there's been a lot of conspiracy theories about and kind of end of world predictions with planets called things like Nibiru, which have supposedly triggered periodic mass extinctions on the Earth. Anything that far out in the solar system isn't really going to be able to affect the Earth in a meaningful way. And we already have hazards on Earth from things like comet impacts and asteroids, and yet life has been on Earth for billions of years. And it's been 65 million years since we last had a big impact from something that wiped out dinosaurs 65 million years ago. So there's a lot of very interesting discoveries being made in astronomy with planets orbiting other stars in our galaxy, and possibly the indirect detection of exoplanets or planetoids in our own solar system. But again, I don't think any of these pose a threat to us. There's far more worrying things to be concerned about here on planet Earth with the environment and the way that politics has been going in a number of countries recently.
Hello.
So maybe something to not talk about now, but if you're looking for things to be concerned about, there are things a lot closer to home than Planet X in our solar system.
Right on, Lewis. It was certainly great to speak with you. Once again, I'd recommend our listeners go to lewisdartnell.com. Also, if you want to pick up the knowledge, how to rebuild our world from scratch, you can go to the/knowledge.org. And I got to tell you, this has been wonderful. I really appreciate you spending time with us, and maybe we'll have the opportunity to speak with you again sometime.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it, Rex. Thank you ever so much for this opportunity, and hopefully speak to you again soon.
Absolutely. And folks, cheers. Folks, I'd also like to recommend go to leakproject.com, become a member at Leak Project, get access to exclusive content. You can also subscribe youtube.com/clandestine time lord. You'll get access to the latest podcasts absolutely free. Have a wonderful day, everybody, and be the change you want to see. This is Rex Bear. Talk to you soon. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this edition of Leak Project. I am your host, Rex Bear, and today's guest is Lewis Dartnell. Now, Lewis is an astrobiologist, and he has a ton of knowledge in biological sciences. He graduated from Oxford University and is now not only a research scientist, a presenter, also an author. Now, he completed his PhD at the University College of London back in 2007 and holds a professorship in science communication at the University of Westminster. Now, his research is in the field of astrobiology and the search for microbial life on Mars. He also has an STFC Science and Society Fellowship and is very active in delivering live events at schools, science festivals, working in the scientific community as a consultant for the media, and he's appeared in numerous TV documentaries and radio shows. He's won several awards for science writing and outreach work and regularly freelances for newspapers and magazines. He's published 3 books. His latest is called The Knowledge. Now, we get into many topics. We talk about the possibility of life on Mars, Venus, and other planets. We obviously get into microbiology. We talk about the reality TV show that's planning on sending 100 people to Mars. We talk about survival as well, the best skills to have. We get into how to rebuild the world after the apocalypse, a life support system, how to have food, clean water, clothes, toothpaste, shampoo, soap, etc. I also talked to him about the cyclical mass die-offs that are discussed in many science papers, the transhuman movement, genetically modified biology combined with electronics, and towards the end of the presentation, I asked him about Nibiru, and if he knows anybody within these circles of communities, because he has a lot of connections that have given him insider information on Planet X. So make sure to listen to what he has to say about that if you're interested. Also, I'd recommend going to leakproject.com. We've got a new storefront there. We have some t-shirts, really cool stickers, and I think that these shirts look great. They've got the logo on the front, and then on the back you'll see it'll say Leak Project, be the change you want to see. And I think that that has a pretty good impact on those that are wanting to make a change. If you're the change you want to see, if everybody is the change that they want to see, what else is there? I mean, really, if you think about it, if you're doing your part and you're following your path, is there anything that can stop you? The universe seems to have these balancers, these, I guess you could call it some type of software program that if the universe starts to get off whack or out of balance, there seems to be something that puts it back into place. This is something I've been doing some very deep thinking into for years. And the more shows we do here at the Leak Project, the more information we gather. It helps build a roadmap for all of us to get to where we need to be. Now, there's a lot going on around the world today. This morning, I got an email from Gerald Clark. We're going to do a show later this afternoon. I don't know if you guys have heard about what happened in China with an airplane that had a genetically modified swine flu in it that they were going to spray on the masses out there, and it got shut down. There's some news reports about this, new news reports about this, and we're going to discuss this tonight. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Be the change you want to see. This is Rex Bear. Talk to you soon. All right. Well, Lewis, it's great to have you on the show here with us at the Leak Project. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. How the heck are you? Yeah, it's great to have you. Now, we've had the opportunity to talk a little bit before the show, and I'm just really excited to hear what you have to say about astrobiology. I've been doing research on Mars and Venus and the moon and different planets in our solar system for years, and I've seen some pretty crazy pictures that I can't explain from like JPL satellites of what almost looks like trees on Mars. Now, whether they are or not, I don't know, but it's pretty compelling. Have you seen some of that stuff before?
I mean, I've obviously seen lots and lots of photographs of Mars. I haven't seen any myself that look like trees.
Okay.
I'd be very surprised if there were any trees growing on Mars. And it has a very thin atmosphere, very high levels of radiation, no liquid water on the surface across large areas of Mars. So I think, because a lot of people say they've seen like Yogi Bear on Mars, or they've seen what looks like a spanner on the surface. And I think this is just a really good example of the human brain being exceedingly good at pattern recognition, at thinking it sees things in kind of, patterns of light and shade in photos, which is, the same thing as lying on your back on a lovely summer's afternoon, having a picnic in the park and looking at the clouds floating by and seeing Mickey Mouse in one of the clouds. It's, pretty much the same effect, I think.
I would definitely say I agree for the most part. There have been a few images that I've seen that I wouldn't explain as that type of anomaly where I'd say, wow, I can see the symmetrical design on the left and the right and such, but it could be just that pattern recognition because I'm not there. I mean, I recently saw an article that somebody posted a picture of the Mars rover, a picture that it took, and then there was a picture of Egypt, and they were exactly the same. I was like, wait a second here. Could the Mars rover actually be in Egypt? I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's, so much on the internet. It's like a bathroom wall. You can write anything about any buddy or whatever.
Lots of conspiracy theories on the internet.
There really is. It reminds me of that commercial where that gal's waiting to meet somebody on a blind date that she talked to on the internet, and he said he was a French model. And she's talking to her friend, and she's like, yeah, I met a French model on the internet, and you can't lie on the internet. Everything on the internet's true. And he shows up, and he just looks like a total goofball, and he goes, bonjour. So it just kind of puts that into perspective. So let's get into the meat and potatoes. I mean, the knowledge that you have. You've gone to school for a lot of years. You've got degrees and research and seen papers that most of us haven't had access to. So let's talk a little bit about your background, and then we'll start getting into astrobiology and what you've seen that's out there. And then I definitely want to touch on your book, The Knowledge, How to Rebuild Our World from Scratch. I think that's a vital thing we need to be thinking about right now with the way the world is.
Yeah, so my research field is in astrobiology, as we kind of mentioned right at the beginning, which is, I guess, a relatively new area of science. It's very interdisciplinary. It involves lots of different areas of science and how they overlap. So I came from a biology background, but I have lots of friends in astrobiology who've come from geology or chemistry or physics and astronomy or kind of planetary science and earth sciences. And astrobiology kind of sits at the middle, the intersection of all these different kinds of science. And it's all about looking at the possibility of there being life beyond the Earth. So it's taking as much of this knowledge and understanding as we've been able to accumulate over the years of life on our own planet and how we think life first got started here, and the incredible ranges of conditions that we now realize terrestrial life can survive under. So these are good extremophile life forms living in very hostile and nasty environments. And then it's extending that knowledge to places beyond the Earth. So Mars, we've already mentioned, which is essentially a desert world today. And one of the